Welcome to the Townsend Letter Podcast, innovative health perspectives since 1983. Brought to you by MycoLife, the world's best mushroom extracts. Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Townsend Letter Podcast. I'm here today with legendary radio host and author, Dr. Gary Null. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Ben. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
You know, I was reading a recent article of yours, and there was a lot on the topic of fluoride. And this is one of those topics that, from a lay perspective, it's hard to make sense of. On the one hand, you hear, you need it for your teeth and these types of things. And then on the other hand, we hear that it's a poison. So I'd like to get a clearer picture on this subject from you, if I may, and things relating to that, which also connect to another article that we had published on Townsend Letter around the roles and responsibilities of the Center for Disease Control. So what's your take on this whole fluoride issue?
Ben, I began my research on fluoride in 1970. I wrote my first article 50 years ago. Actually, a little longer, right? Gee whiz. 55 years ago. Whoa, that's aging us. The issue was this. We were led to believe, in fact, it was codified in common knowledge, that anything the government scientists told us, the CDC, the FDA, we should believe. Anything our physician told us, we should believe. I grew up in that environment. I'm sure you did as well. As a result, during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, many of our parents died young. They died of emphysema, of heart disease, of lung cancers. And we thought that, again, we thought it was normal. When I was growing up, middle age was 33.
Oh.
All right? That's when you were middle-aged. From then on, it was downhill. I never saw anyone exercising in my community outside of high school, college, or maybe in summer softball. But otherwise, you bowled and you read. Everyone belonged to a reading club, a book club. Very sedentary. The older you got, the more sedentary you were expected to be. Well, you're getting old. Take it easy, right? If you recover from something, it was not uncommon for hip surgery or knee surgery to recover for a month. And I began to see this. Now, I wasn't very bright, but I was observant. That's always been one of my just gifts that I was given by my mother. Observe things. Now, I won't know always what I'm observing, but I did understand this. I never saw anyone getting healthier the older they got. I saw the pot bellies, I saw the jowiness, and everybody had, by age 40, then it was called sugar diabetes. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And we thought that was normal. And I would sit there, and one aunt of mine was sitting there sewing. She had a bowl of candy there. It was always there. And she'd just be eating candy all day long. And no one ever thought about going for a walk. In fact, when I was 16 years old, I lived in a small town, a little city called Parkersburg, West Virginia, on the High River. And there's a bridge that went over the High River from West Virginia to Ohio, Belpre, Ohio. And I decided to go for a run. I had on my gym shorts and my t-shirt, so I went for the run. The police pulled me over. What are you running from? As I'm just out going for a run. Why? Well, because I'm an athlete, and I'm on the basketball team and the wrestling team, and this is one of the ways we keep in shape. Sure about that? And thank goodness, one of the cops said, aren't you Russ's relative? I said, yeah, he's my godfather, Russ Maurer. He was chief of police. And they said, okay, go on, right. Think of being stopped for running.
Yeah.
I remember when I first came to New York City in 1965, June 5th, I went for a run in Central Park on a Sunday morning. I was the only one running. In the entire park, I didn't see a single person running. Nobody got up early in Manhattan on a Sunday. So I thought, this is strange. Well, now it's not strange. Now, a lot of things are not strange. And we were never told that our diet had anything to do with disease. We just were told the diet has to be based upon the food pyramid, where you have to have 4 items 3 times a day. As a result, we all had some kind of, either I had still cut oatmeal with milk that had not been homogenized. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Where the milk, the cream, which was sweet, settled at the top. It was pasteurized, not homogenized. You had a little milk box outside on the porch.
With the metal
Milk
cap,
would
and then
come.
you pull it off and you lick the cream right off the cap too, right?
Absolutely. Yes. It was so much fun. And then you put the bottle back in there and they pick it up. And so I'd have that with a banana and some raisins and some steel cut oatmeal. My family, no. No, they would have bacon and eggs. Once a week, they would have Canadian sausage. Now, that always perplexed me. Sausage is pork, bacon is pork. Why do you differentiate between bacon and sausage? Never made any sense. Same from the animal. Tastes the same. They would have that. They would have their eggs. They would have a glass of milk. Always had to have milk for strong bones. Turns out it's absolutely not true.
Really?
And as a result, people stuck with the same food every day. Lunch, did you have this? I'd come home from school, and back then we didn't have chaperones taking us to school. I just saw a woman was arrested because her son, who was 12, went to school on his own. And that was considered endangerment of the child. No, I'd run to school. We ran everywhere. We went out and played and come home, and there would be Campbell's soup, generally tomato soup, let's say, a grilled cheese sandwich,
Right.
and a glass of milk. And everyone thought that was normal. It tasted good, but it wasn't good for us. All pro-inflammatory. I give you this as background because you are what you eat. You are also what you think. You also are what you do. But if you ask me, Gary, what's the cause of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, high blood pressure, dementia? I would say, well, we could blame the food. We could blame the forever chemicals. We could blame the high fructose corn syrup going into all of our beverages, causing an epidemic in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We could blame that almost 90% of our diet is pro-inflammatory. Now, it's one thing to have an infection, and therefore your infection creates symptoms like mucus in the throat, drainage of the nose, local pain. But then that creates inflammation, which is one of the body's way of signaling you, hey, something's wrong. Stop doing what you're doing, eating what you're eating. But we don't, because the goal is to eliminate symptoms. So the symptomatic relief is the emphasis. But no one ever asks, why not deal with the cause? Why not just get rid of this once and for all? Learn its lessons. But we don't. So to be accurate, the number one cause of all disease except genetic disease is propaganda. It's the number one cause of all of our problems. I mean, from mandating the COVID-19 vaccine, fluoridation, smoking. The AMA had an editor-in-chief, real wackaloon. His name was Dr. Fishbein back in the 50s. He's the one that went after anyone suggesting that there was any other way of approaching cancer except surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. And so he went after the most cited scientist in American history up to that point and destroyed his career. And it was all about a simple serum that was taken from horses where their body was infected with an antigen. Then they would take the serum that had massive antibodies, injected into dogs, cats, mice who had cancer. Cancer was disappeared. Dr. Andrew Ivy. If you want to see one of the most interesting stories of conspiracies to destroy our greatest living scientist, he was not only a scientist, MD, PhD, he was also one of the jurists for America at Nuremberg. So he was just this phenomenal genius. And then they destroyed him because they couldn't get the rights to crubiacin. And so they decided, if we can't own it, nobody can have it. That man who led that also went after Hoxie's treatment. If you've ever heard of Hoxie's treatment,
Yeah.
I interviewed Hoxie's nurse, who was 90-some years old.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I had all these interviews with her. I was only 22 years old when a woman came into my radio studio, WMCA. And she was short, she had white hair, but she had these really blue eyes. I mean, just like that, you look and think, wow.
Mm-hmm.
She was 90-some years old, and she's sitting there with a smile. And after the show, I go out and I say, hi. She says, "You're just like my ex-husband." I said, "Who's your ex-husband?" "Bernard McFadden." I said, "The Bernard McFadden, the second major publisher in America behind William Randolph Hearst, who wrote all those health books?" "Yeah." She says, "And I brought you first editions signed by him of all of his books, because you're the next Bernard McFadden." I didn't know all that much about him. And he was a person who was a friend of Kellogg and of the Kellogg's. There's one that was a medical doctor, one brother, and they founded Kellogg's. Well, you talk about a genius ahead of his time. Everything we're doing today in health, he was doing back then. He had health sanitariums. He would stimulate the body with low-level electric probes to the brain to deal with conditions. He was juicing. They had these juice presses where hydraulic presses where you'd pump, and they would drink a lot of juices, eat a lot of raw foods. They had a lot of probiotics. They were massive amounts of probiotics. He had people exercising. This was in the 1800s. He was getting people well. He was a friend of Graham of the Graham cracker. And so you had these, they were called natural hygienists. And the last living one is a person I met named Herbert Shelton down in Texas. And he had this place where you go and fast and juice and fast and juice. He was able to reverse a lot of diseases. And I was so impressed by him, I wrote a book based upon his concepts of food combining, that if you eat certain foods together, it'd be better than if you eat them separately. And I, as a scientist at that time at the Institute of Biology, I tried to see if it worked, and it did work. For example, when you eat something that's got a sugar in it, that's a monosaccharide. It requires no digestion. It's going to go right through you and spike your blood sugar. But if you eat something with fat slows everything down. When you eat fat in any form, like you have a piece of cheesecake, or you have some fried chicken, or you have anything that's deep fried, you're getting a lot of fat. That fat immediately signals the gallbladder to start releasing bile, which then breaks down that fat in your intestine after it's left the stomach. But even in the stomach, lipase and other enzymes will break down the food to what is called bolus into chyme, like a soup. So when food exits your stomach, it should exit like a soup. Therefore, it's going to be easier to digest and pull up the nutrients, get them into the portal vein, get them into the liver, recombine them, get them into the cells and utilize them. And the balance of the undigested fibers and dead cells, bacteria, can be flushed out. And the healthier that process is, I wrote a book on this, on digestion. And that was motivated based upon Herbert Sheldon. And I'm there for 2 weeks. I'm there all day seeing people that medicine had given up on, and they're regaining their health through this food combining. So he said, never have a sugar with a fat, because the sugar cannot get into the intestine through the stomach if fat's in the stomach. So then the body's going to digest the sugar at the same rate it digests the protein and fat. That's why most people, when they eat lunch, they still have breakfast in their stomach. When they eat dinner, they still have lunch in their stomach. When they go to bed, they still have dinner in their stomach. None of that is healthy. We should have about 12 hours between our last meal and our first meal. And that's based upon intermittent fasting, which is solidly going to help extend your lifespan. You want to extend your lifespan? The one thing that no one disagrees with is intermittent fasting. If you have your last meal at 6 o'clock at night, don't have your breakfast till 6 o'clock in the morning. Allow 12 hours. I actually go 15 hours. and that'll extend your lifespan. And I'm the person who headed the anti-aging division for 36 years in the Institute of Applied Biology. I've done 6 clinical studies, or 5. My 6th is coming up in 2 weeks. And the things we can do to slow down the reversing aging process and the diseases. But there were people I met. Mind you, some of those people were born and thrived in the 1800s, and here I am, a kid, not that bright. I'm around people that are really smart, and they're doing simple things, uncomplicated things. And so in any case, I was learning about things that we should do, but weren't, because they weren't current scientific methods, all right? And that's what the law was based upon. And if you dared treat a patient using non-current medical standards, you could go to jail. And doctors did go to jail. One doctor in particular, Dr. Privatera in California, he was pro-surgery, pro-chemotherapy, and pro-radiation treatment for cancer patients, but he believed that that was only part of the story. Now that you've demasked the cancer, and hopefully you got the stem cell of the cancer, otherwise it's going to grow back, now build up the immune system. Because if you're sick, your immune system is in the toilet. So bring it back. So he would put him on a healthy diet and right supplements and de-stressing. And the state of California went after him, found him guilty of fraud, medical fraud. He had 272 patients who were there to testify on his behalf. The judge wouldn't allow it. Prosecution wouldn't allow it. People who had had cancer therapies, then they rebuilt their health through him. So he was helping, but that wasn't accepted. And so they put him in a chain gang, hard labor. His wife called me and says, my husband's working a chain gang. He's a medical doctor, Dr. James Privatera. Can you help me? I had a syndicated national radio show at the time. And so I got my audience to flood Jerry Brown's father, who was governor of California at that time, and say, this is an injustice, miscarriage. Let's get him out. And we got him out of jail. But that didn't stop him from doing this in every state. And finally, doctors were terrified just to use common sense, simple, natural approaches to disease. So they didn't do it. Only a few let people know they were doing it, and they were attacked. They lost their license. So I worked for 5 years, and we finally got the first law passed in New York State, in the United States, with the doctor's consent, and you're agreeing with the doctor, you could use non-traditional therapy, and the doctor and patient could not be challenged. That was New York. That's just one of the little things along the way. And then I thought about all those genius, and one of the smartest of them all was a doctor who used light, refractory light, on a cancer, and it dissolved the cancer. And it worked. And orthodox medicine, before Fishbein, was agreeing it worked. And that was Royal Rife, who invented the Rife microscope. Now, I'll conclude this part of the issue. So they burned down his laboratory in time. This same Johnny Lee McFadden, whose husband was Bernard McFadden, and they had like 50 of these health clinics around the United States, developed based upon the concept of natural hygiene. There's your Herbert Sheldon and Kellogg, and also Bernard McFadden, physical fitness. You know, he was like the first Mr. Atlas. And then he motivated some people, including the nutritionist to the stars, who I also met. He looked like one of these mustache Pete's from the 1930s. Had, like a very dyed mustache, came out here, and very dyed hair. And in any case, but he was a nice guy. And he was the nutrition guru for Gloria Swanson, who gave me a call one day in the early 1970s. Gary, I can get us a school in Harlem that we can change the menu, but I'm not a nutritionist, you are. Will you do the menu? I said, sure. And within 6 months of her, because she was the motivating voice, not me, I prepared the menu, and we had the first really healthy organic lunch program in America. in a school in Harlem. The kids loved it. But then I'm talking to her, and she's, back in the 1920s and 30s, I had my own nutritionist. He was still alive. And there was he was, I guess, in his 80s. Anyhow, so think of the connections. I'm a young kid. I'm naive. I'm new to New York City. I trust people. That's a big mistake. I believe everyone. That's a real stupid thing. But, that's how I grew up. Someone gave you their word, they honored it. Otherwise, they looked bad. So I learned to trust people. I learned to like people for just being a human being. I never talked about our differences. My mom said, invite everyone to your table unless they don't want to come. Because we're all spirits, we're all sentient, we're all creatures of a greater awareness. And so therefore, I didn't care about someone's religion or ethnicity, or they were human beings. So I never had a problem talking with anyone. Age wasn't the issue. So here I'm young, and here they are older, and at least I had a platform to take what they were doing, like Albertson Georgi I met. And I was friends with Linus Pauling. He would come to my lab all the time when he came to New York, and especially when he was under attack from doing vitamin C research showing that 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C given to terminally ill cancer patients increased their lifespan. The Mayo Clinic then came out with an article rebutting him, saying, we did the same study. And he came on my show and he says, no, you did not. Your patients had chemotherapy. My patients did not. Chemotherapy destroys the liver and therefore adversely affects the absorption of vitamin C, ascorbic acid, converting it into ascorbate, which is what the cells use. You engaged in fraud. No one else would have him on. Here's a 2-time Nobel Prize winner, published over 450 articles in scientific journals. And yet now he was destroyed. This is before, the internet, and they just cast him aside. He and Dr. Cameron at the Vale of Leven Hospital in Scotland did that research, and he brought it onto my air. I had him on regularly. In any case, so here one day, one Saturday, Johnny Lee McFadden, this little woman with the bright eyes, she said, I'm going to take you someplace. I said, fine. I didn't know where she would take me. So after my show at 2:00 on a Saturday, I did a 4-hour Saturday show and a 2-hour daily show. She drove upstate. And I see the sign says Livingston Manor. That's above Liberty, New York. It's real rural, beautiful hills, valleys. And we go to an old, looks like one of those old resorts that had closed down. We went inside. It was one of her resorts. But she introduced me to a woman, an older woman. I don't know how old she was. I'm guessing in her 80s. And all over everything in there were these slides, thousands of slides.
Like microscope slides?
Yes, microscope slides. And she says, Gary, I want to introduce you to the personal assistant of Royal Rife. And she's willing to share with you his formula. I didn't know much about Royal Rife. I just had heard his name, but I hadn't done any research on him. And she showed me thousands of papers and slides proving cancer, inoperable, stage 4, no cancer. And then the formula. There was a formula for every single thing. And there were hundreds of thousands of numbers that had to be imbalanced before it worked. And I said, why are you showing me all this? She says, because I'm the last link to all that great knowledge of this wonderful human being who they destroyed, burned down his lab. But we got this out because we were warned that we were under attack. So he transferred all this over to my place. And once lab was burned down, he couldn't get funding, and it was over. And I've kept this all this time. He said, someday you'll meet someone who you can trust, who will be able to get this out to the public. And so we spent the whole day, and I was looking at slides and reading the papers and seeing the pictures of the patients before and after, and other scientists who agreed with him and had all this correspondence. And I was thinking all the way back, I was thinking, wow, this will make a great expose, because I'd also taken on the case of Andrew Ivy, had him on my show, had his patients on the show, had the Durovic who invented carbamazepine on my show. And the government just kept harassing him, attacking him. And so I said, and we got a spotlight for Andrew Ivy just before he died. And then Durovic died, except for 10 years later, I get a call, and it's from Durovic. He said, I let people think I died because I saw that your government, working hand in glove with the AMA, would never allow me a peaceful day. So I just went to Europe and I'm quietly doing my work. And so we had this whole conversation. Fortunately, I recorded all my conversations back then. And because I could then take notes. I had thousands of these documents. So anyhow, I said, okay, I'm going to make Roll Rife the next story. But I had all these other commitments. So it took me about 4 months. In 4 months, I finally cleared my schedule. I drove back up there. The place was empty. Don't know what happened. And Johnny McFadden died. So I had no connection. Now, word got out that I was allowing people to do different types of research at the Institute of Applied Biology upstairs on the 3rd floor, which I had the whole 3rd floor, if it was something unique that could contribute. And I had wonderful human beings came, one idea after another after another. And there's one guy showed up. He was a professor of chemistry at UCLA. And he said, I heard that you were open to allowing scientists who have credible ideas to use your lab discreetly to do some research that our own institutions would not necessarily allow us to do. It'd be too fringe to make us look bad. He said, that's correct. He said, well, I have the formula for the Roll Rife. I said, fine, let's prove it. And to prove it, we took people with herpes, 1, 2, 6, 9, dozens of herpes. And for 6 months, he would come in on a monthly basis for 3 days and work with the people who had this. Didn't work. Not a single person was changed. And I said, you tried, but you didn't have the formula. I had dozens of people try, and nobody to this day has been able to duplicate Roll Rife's formula. And then I get a call from a physician who's highly respected in San Francisco. And he says, I want you to meet someone. He's a genius. He's from NASA. And I said, fine. So he comes in and he says, see what you think. And so I selected some people for him to try this non-invasive, non-medical light therapy. And it worked. And to this day, it is the only time I've ever seen proof that someone duplicated Roll Rife. And I mean, I filmed it too. And I'm in the process of trying to raise the money to get him a clinical study. Again, it's non-invasive, it's not medical. He doesn't promote it, he's not out there selling it, but he came up with it. So anyhow, that's kind of like the journey I've been on, always looking for something. Some work, some don't work, and providing a platform as I did. Now, come back to your original question, because all this is interconnected. We used this industrial pollutant, this toxicant, for decades because we were told it would protect the enamel on your teeth and that it was safe. In fact, so safe, you could take little fluoride tablets and take them like you would a vitamin tablet. The trouble is, nothing was honest or true about it. But because it was promoted by the Dental Association, dentists had to agree to use it. Just like an oncologist has to use chemotherapy, whether they get the results or not. But where is the innovation? Where is the challenging yourself part of this? Where is their do no harm part of this? It doesn't exist today. And we see that by the flu vaccine, which has no efficacy or safety proven, or this H1N1, all these, the hepatitis B for children born just hours, where there's no science showing that they need it because they don't have hepatitis. So when it came to fluoride, I did all my research and I wrote a paper called The Fluoride Fiasco. And over the years, about every 3 or 4 years, something new comes out and I add it. And the very first people that I spoke with about fluoride was one of the founders of the National Cancer Institute, Dr. Dean Burke. And then he knew of a separate scientist who had gotten a PhD in chemistry from Ohio State University named John Yamianis.
Say the name again?
Both of them. John Yamianis.
Yamianis.
Yeah, we call him Dr. Y for Yamianis. And both of them were able to work together and presented a paper, had it published, showing that adding fluoride at 1 part per million, the amount you're going to get in a normal glass of water, would increase 15,000 preventable cancer deaths per year from fluoride alone. So then I got into, well, how in the world did this end up getting accepted in our water supplies? It was all about the profit. What do we do with a product that is toxic? Well, let's put it in some water systems. And then I started looking at cavitations, mottling of teeth, because you get these round spots which are permanent on your teeth. And it was not shown to be efficacious in a large group of children about preventing the loss of enamel. So I wrote several articles, all told about 20, on fluoride. Keep adding. And the latest is that major scientific journals are now publishing articles about it's a neurotoxin. So as a neurotoxin, it can kill a brain neuron at 1 part per billion with a B, not 1 part per million. And you're getting a high dose, much higher than what it's shown to be toxic. And so it has all these different ramifications for our body. It also has been shown to calcify the pineal gland. And that's a little grape-sized seed gland in the middle of our brains. And that's not good. Cause a permanent melatonin disruption. So what we have done, we have taken Anthony Fauci, who says, criticize me, you're criticizing science, as if he is the final arbiter of all things true in science. He is not. Just to the contrary. So now what we have is we have to deconstruct the paradigms of deception that have grown into this monolithic red pill matrix that we live in, where 99.9% of all physicians refuse to protest COVID. They still go along with vaccine schedules. They still give 10 million women a year synthetic hormone replacement therapy, even though the government's own studies show you increase a woman who takes synthetic hormone replacement therapy by 13%. Increase in heart attacks, strokes, colon rectal cancer, breast cancer, uterine cancer, and dementia. Now, they've known that for over 20 years, and they're still giving it. That means that 1.3 million women are sacrificed to be injured, harmed, or killed every year from taking synthetic hormone replacement therapy. What, to turn off hot flashes and recalcify bones to prevent osteoporosis? We can do that with dong quai, bow tie, passion flower, a mixture of natural herbs that have been used for thousands of years around the world. But we won't do it. We can't patent that. So these institutions of false notions and false beliefs lead me to this. As I said at the beginning of our discussion, the number one cause of all non-genetic disease is propaganda. Who controls the propaganda? Well, when was the last time someone complained, as Dr. Fine did in 1972, April, I had him on my show, physician in San Francisco. He said it's the processing of children's food, the cereals, the artificial flavors, the coloring agents, the emulsifiers, the dyes, that triggers the body into a hyperreactive position because it adversely affects the glandular system and the endocrine system. He was right. When we took the sugar in dairy out of one prison, food violence just dropped way down. Dr. Schoenthaler and Dr. Strauss did that. We have known for a long time that if we're allergic to something, it can create a cerebral allergy. It can cause all forms of adverse effects. Yet the dairy industry, the wheat industry, the sugar industry, the meat industry have taken bad products that are known to cause inflammation, which is the underlying cause of disease physically. If you keep stimulating inflammation, you're going to stimulate cytokines, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and you're going to damage or destroy cells. How many? About 12,000 gene alterations per cell per day. Now, if you have 50,000 cells and you're damaging every cell 12,000 times a day, you're just speeding up the aging process phenomenally fast. So colas, soft drinks, energy drinks, all the food that you see advertised on television, all that contributes to premature aging and disease. Yet it is also profitable. Most of the drugs that we're asked to take, we could use other non-drug approaches and get better outcomes, dealing with the causes of conditions rather than the symptoms. Yet no one in radio, television, print media suggests for a second, let's be honest with the public and show them how unhealthy the foods and beverages are. Instead, they just keep promoting more. The companies want profit over public health. They win. The FDA supports them. The CDC supports them. The health and nutrition is irrelevant to them. And that's why you're propagandized into believing that something is normal. My mother smoked 3-pack cigarettes a day. My dad smoked 4. Yet when I told them it's bad for them, they said, no, I'm not, Gary. Our doctor, our family doctor, whose kids you're in school with, they all smoke. Do you think that if they smoked and knew it was bad for them, that they wouldn't stop smoking and tell their patients to stop? I said, Mom, they're propagandized. And I had collected full-page ads from the Journal of the American Medical Association and showed they're telling women that 56,000 doctors smoke Lucky Strikes, and these doctors recommend smoking for women because it calms their nerves. And then I showed her an ad. I said, Mom, that's a cough syrup for babies with opium in it. Yeah? Yes. And Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it. And I just showed her ads that I put together for an article I was doing of all the things we've accepted because science and medicine and authority figures told us, trust us. And we did. And it's taken right up till today for people to realize, do not trust anything until you can see the truth in it. So my final thought on this is never do anything, eat anything, until you first find the truth in it. Therefore, you can see, I was about to think and do this, but I realized that's benefiting everyone else, not me. It's going to cause my heart to be irregular in heartbeat or my joints to be stiff. No, I'm not going to do that. I found the truth in it. But that also means you're dealing with the public that has been conditioned to live a passive spectator life. You go to a ball game, passive. Watch television, the internet, sitting there all day on your phone, passive. Listen to music, passive. You have to be proactive. And to do that, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And our number one addiction in America is comfort addiction. I have found that 90% of the people I work with who have a terminal illness would rather die enjoying their comfort right up to the end than to change and go through discomfort. So you see, when you have propaganda, it creates, it's not your fault. Don't worry about what it's going to do to your body today, now. Wouldn't you like that pizza right now? You don't want to go to the farmer's market and look for the right herbs. No, call it, it comes, you eat it, you're good. Then you can go back to watching porn and getting calluses on your right hand. This is how stupid it's become. Think of it, and then how you do one thing is almost always how you do everything else. So the person that eats a crappy diet, who sees themselves getting sick and their children getting sick and their children getting obese, are you going to trust that what the person does elsewhere is going to be accurate? That's the person who's going to vote for sociopathic politicians for important offices. Do you ever notice that with rare exception, we have sociopaths in positions of power? We take the most morally bankrupt individuals and give them total control over our lives, and then are angry when they do the wrong thing. And we're forced to acknowledge they've done the wrong thing. Look how long it took to realize how many people had done something wrong. Weapons of mass destruction. No, there weren't. Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin, the North Vietnamese sunk. No, they didn't. And Johnson lied about that. We have to go into Afghanistan to get Osama bin Laden. No, we didn't. The war on terror, we sponsor it. We fund it. The Mujahideen. Almost everything that's in the public awareness or consciousness is opposite of the truth. So why would you be any less likely to be a victim of the wrong diet, the wrong beverage, the wrong medication, the wrong vaccine, if you're dealing with people that lie for a living? That answers, I hope, the question on fluoride.
I think it does. It lumps it into a broader category that relates to generally being mindful, aware of what is happening in your own body, and that propaganda is prevalent everywhere you look. And you have to be in touch with and in tune with the whole concept that, you're constantly being marketed to. And when you make decisions about what to eat and how to live, that you do those things deliberately and carefully and thoughtfully. So it's a great reminder, Gary. We always appreciate your clear perspective on that subject so much. I want to thank you for being with us today.
All I'm trying to do is show that we are not as separated from reality as we'd like to believe. We're not protected by the authorities. They've weaponized virtually all the ways that we approach. You're not allowed to have any open, honest, and civil debate on the dangers or safety efficacy of any vaccine, for example. Then freedom of speech no longer counts. So we have to be aware. Just go to neutral and non-ideologically just look at things for what they are. When we can stop filtering our own self because of being propagandized that there's right and wrong, good and bad, and everything else doesn't exist. When life becomes black and white, then you're on the wrong path. So I'm glad that your audience is open to looking at things at a deeper level and the interconnectivity of things. That's why I mentioned all the older people who I learned from, and I saw what they were doing and succeeding at before the internet, because every one of those people were ultimately dismissed as quacks, and yet they weren't. To show some respect for you and your audience, if they go to GaryNull.com, they can sign up for my newsletter for free. All right?
Absolutely. Okay. We'll include links to that. And I'm also going to try to get you to send me some of the links to some of the studies that you referenced in this conversation. I think our audience would be interested to see the real science and learn more about some of these fascinating individuals who you've encountered in your career. But for now, for the Townsend Letter Podcast, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today? This podcast was brought to you by Mycolife, makers of the world's best mushroom extracts. Available exclusively at mycolife.us. Townsend Letter. Your subscription means the world.